Hello and good afternoon and welcome back to Automotive Logistics and Supply Chain North America Live. It's pleased to have you joining us here again today. We've had a great start to today's session with a great panel discussion and some interesting insights into the North America market. Today we have a great session lined up for you, which will be looking at Canada's Silicon Valley of the North. In this session, we'll discuss how the automotive technology ecosystem is ramping up in line with the demand for more connected, autonomous, shared and electric vehicles, with recent investments and labor agreements from traditional automotive players coupled with an emerging technology startup culture is positioning Canadian automotive sector for growth and success. But of course, assurance of this is far from guaranteed. And to explore the opportunities ahead, we have a great panel of experts, including Scott McKenzie, Senior National Manager for External Affairs at Toyota Canada. Scott is responsible for all external affairs functions for Toyota's manufacturing and sales operations in Canada, including technical purchasing, supply chain development, corporate strategy planning and government affairs. His role in government affairs has seen him at the front line of several key policy negotiations, most notably as a trusted advisor to the federal government on its successful negotiation of the USMCA. We're also joined by Soeren Striepe, who's Senior Manager, Corporate R&D and Innovation at Magna International. Dr. Soeren Striepe is currently a Senior Manager at Magna International's Corporate Engineering R&D team. His focus is on advanced electronic propulsion technology, particularly on batteries and other energy storage technologies. We also have Frantz Saintellemy, the President and COO of LeddarTech. Frantz is an internationally recognized expert in advanced technologies with over 20 years of experience in automotive, IoT sensing, semiconductors, and artificial intelligence. And we're also joined by Colin Dhillon, who's Chief Technology Officer at the Automotive Parts Manufacturers Association. He'll be moderating today's session, and Colin leads connected and autonomous vehicle technology projects and provides support to both the Canadian automotive industry and governments on matters of cybersecurity, mobility, smart infrastructure, and Industry 4.0. So thanks very much, everybody, for joining us today. Really pleased to have an exciting discussion on how this Canadian infrastructure is developing. So over to you, Colin, and I'll leave you to bring the guests together and have an interesting conversation.
Beamish, thank you very much for the introductions, and yes, we are glad to be talking about this topic and to maybe refute the title of Silicon Valley of the North, and we'll have some fun doing that. But you know, as we begin, I wanted to kind of frame a question for the esteemed panel, really to do with the elephant in the room, I would say, at the present moment, which is semiconductor shortage. You know, it's been going on for a few weeks. It's been in the news and in the media. Supply chains are being choked, you know, and it's because of COVID. They're saying it is because of this global pandemic, where folks are investing in televisions and tablets and gaming units, which use the same chipsets that we need in anti-locking braking systems and infotainment stacks on vehicles. So there is a lake or a river that's been dried up, you know, and what's the solution to this is really going to be the question. And I'd probably like to start with Frantz, because him and I were chatting a few days ago, and he used the analogy of a tap as you were able to start it and stop it. And maybe, you know, what are the solutions for us to not fall short for critical products like chipsets and semiconductor units?
Well, you know, it's interesting because if you think about it, you know, automotive was already a small section of the semiconductor industry. I mean, if you think over the last few years, semiconductors, advanced semiconductor nodes has been used more and more in automotive, and that's continued to accelerate. So that means TSMC, that means more advanced fabrication. But all in all, automotive sector is a very, very minute part of the TSMC business. So that's prior to the pandemic. After the pandemic, it's even smaller. And all of a sudden, we're expecting that everything to go back online as if everything was normal. Meanwhile, other industries have kept growing up. I think the best way to do this is really through this collaborative forecasting that all the tier 1s, tier 2 suppliers, as well as the semiconductor manufacturers, working hand in hand with collaborative forecasting to have a more long-range view, but also be realistic. So what are the critical requirements short-term to keep the lines going, rather than everyone expecting everyone to be able to go back online with full forecasting from basically nothing to millions of units. And I think it's not realistic. We have to get to a more pragmatic and realistic scenario, and panicking won't help it, because TSMC is not going to be able to come online overnight, but it's going to be able to come online only when suppliers are working in collaboration with the different part manufacturers, as well as getting long-range visibility towards the demand. So this gradual acceleration is really what's going to solve the problem.
Frantz, thank you. And Scott, as representing a global OEM, how are some of these challenges that Toyota's faced, with regards to this shortage?
I think the biggest challenge, Colin, is visibility within the supply chain, and then also the length of the supply chain. So when you're talking about a semiconductor, you're talking about a part that's very, very far upstream from us. So it's going into a part that goes into a part that goes into a part that eventually shows up in a car. And there's limited places where you're going to source a semiconductor from. There's limited places where you can get them. So for us, initially, when we first heard about the risk to our supply chain, the focus was on first understanding what the problem is. It's very, very far upstream, and then in some cases, if the part, in this case, could be manufactured in Asia, it's got a long pipeline before it gets to us as a manufacturer in North America. It'd be 6 weeks or more. So first step is understanding what your problem is, and then second step is finding a solution. In our case, in Canada specifically, we haven't been greatly impacted. We make global vehicles, meaning our vehicles are sold globally, and they're also produced in different markets. So for us, we have a global purchasing organization looking after the sourcing of those commodities. But when you have regional vehicles with lower volume, you're going to have a lot more risk.
And maybe an open question, Soeren, feel free, and Frantz and Scott. But is one of the challenges that chipsets and semiconductors have left our shores and have moved to places like Asia, and without saying it, is it because it's a cost factor, or is it now because it's a technology, in the sense that they now have the expertise in some of those jurisdictions to be the ones providing, and what advantages could there be for Canada to be looking at bringing some of that back on our shores, which I'm sure Canada has been reputable for over 3 decades for leading in semiconductors, but why the shortages, and how do we fix it?
I'll take that one as well. But generally speaking, as a manufacturer, you want things as close to you as possible. It reduces your risk from a supply chain point of view, and also reduces your overall logistics cost. But it's an economic decision. Usually, it's different now with USMCA, but it's usually an economic decision where you're going to source a part from. So it could be that a particular jurisdiction, and Asia would be one of them, is particularly adept at producing a commodity. But long story short, it's capability and cost. And the reason semiconductors are not as prevalent in North America is because someone else is making them at a better cost than what we can do them for.
And Soeren, Frantz, would you agree?
I would say it's cost, but it's also strategy. I think the reality is that as industries, having been born in the semiconductor space, I've witnessed it's not always cost. We can make technologies as cost efficient in North America, especially today. The issue is we've lost our edge in terms of lithography and in terms of equipments, robotics, because again, we favored going into low-cost countries, which started with low-cost labors, but eventually the same fabs that are run out of TSMC and Hsinchu, they're all automated. There's very little human beings, processing and especially cheap labor. And so now it's a bigger problem than cost. It's actually technology and the capability to invest tens of billions of dollars to run a new fab, to start a new fab. And so we've lost our edge in areas like advanced lithography, photonics, material science, not photonics, but sorry, robotics, material science. So it's a more of a strategic discussion. What do we want to be in terms of region in North America? I think those discussions are happening in the US. I don't think we're having these discussions in Canada, but it's going to be a long road to catch up to TSMC because of these equipments and the technology advances.
Thank you. Okay, well, let's move on to our second question, and let me frame it by saying we'll take Silicon Valley as the North as a compliment, but over the past 2 years, just the Greater Toronto area alone, we're not talking necessarily even about Montreal, we're not even talking about other areas in the province of Ontario, outside of the province of Ontario, but just the GTA alone for the past 2 years has been generating more tech jobs than Silicon Valley, Washington, D.C., and Seattle combined. Our growth in tech didn't start yesterday. It's been going on for possibly 3, if not 4 decades. Probably one of the things we don't do well as some of the other jurisdictions is tell the rest of the world about what we're doing and how good we are at doing it. Let's face that. But the fundamentals that really differentiate, I think, the innovation and the technology that we see happening in Canada are probably based off a stable population, excellent education systems and academic institutions, immigration that attracts the best. I was just going to make a political comment, but I won't. Political and economic stability, we'll leave it at that. And a naturally rich resource is, for the development, because when we're talking technology, we're also talking about zero emission vehicles, whether they be hydrogen fuel cell, whether they be lithium ion battery packs, or whether they be solid state, or whether they be technology and sensory technology like solid state LiDAR on a vehicle. So we aren't just the Silicon Valley of the North, but how does Canada charge ahead over the next 5 to 10 years? What do we need to do when we've been provided with several opportunities and announcements over the past few months with regards to EVs? How does Canada keep charging ahead and make sure it breaks away from the shackles that have been labeled the Silicon Valley of the North? I'll start with Soeren.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, so I agree with all the points that you made that have enabled Canada, our innovation ecosystem to play a strong role. Would like to add actually and highlight as part of the enablers, this university landscape that we have. You mentioned Toronto, Waterloo area here, but across Canada from east to west coast, strong universities, strong innovation ecosystems with incubators, accelerators around that. And also would like to mention the National Research Council, which is actually a research institution, Canada's national research institution, but they have an arm, the Industrial Research Assistance Program, IRAP, which is actually geared towards supporting startup companies and small and medium-sized companies to advance their technology. So these are enablers of this development. So now and going forward as well.
And Soeren, staying with you, we've all heard the announcements of the 1 million mile battery by Tesla, but very few probably even read beyond the headline. They all go, great, wow, Tesla's going to have a 1,000,000-mile battery. But as you're focusing on battery technology research and development, we know Jeff Down and his team out of Dalhousie University in Halifax, Nova Scotia, are the team behind this Tesla 1,000,000-mile battery. And so what are your findings when it comes to furthering, the zero emission vehicle technology, and what are the positives and where are potentially some of the gaps as well?
Well, this is really a dynamically developing space still. Yes, lithium-ion batteries are around for some time, but they're still developing fast, and then there's technologies that may come beyond lithium-ion, and Jeff Dunn, other teams here, other startup companies and companies have been strongly involved in it, are strong players and recognized as leaders in the world. So that's what I want to say there is that it is really, we have a good landscape there, and can advance on that. Now, there are challenges in the battery space if you go into a really production development of cell chemistries and also installing manufacturing the capacities. These are different challenges that Canada is well positioned as well, but they need to be tackled in a different way.
And Scott, asking an OE, we've had the announcements for the past 3 or 4 months of the Detroit 3 and electric vehicles, whether they be passenger or whether they be commercial, all around lithium-ion battery packs and potentially skateboard technology platforms. Toyota's approach is somewhat different, hybrid, plug-in hybrid, and then hydrogen fuel cell. So, tell us where Toyota, and specifically Toyota Canada, feels Canada is heading, and let's talk about hydrogen fuel cell and what the potential opportunities are. Is it commercial or is it passenger vehicle?
I'll address the last point you made first, Colin. For hydrogen fuel cell, there's commercial applications that we're working on. We have some projects down in the Port of Los Angeles in the U.S., and we're looking at projects in Canada as well. There's also potential for passenger cars, but the obvious problem is lack of infrastructure, so filling infrastructure for hydrogen. But we think there's great potential there for hydrogen in all of those spaces. The first part of your question around our view on electrification, there shouldn't be any ambiguity. Toyota is completely on board with an electric future. I think every OEM has probably publicly stated, that at some point they're going to be emissions free, whether you pick it as 2050 in our case, or some companies recently have come out and established earlier targets. But the open question is, when are you going to get there? And realistically, in Canada today, a fully electric vehicle, battery electric vehicle with zero emissions, it's about 2% of our annual sales, and we've got 28 million cars on the road in Canada. It's going to take a long time, to get internal combustion engines off the road and replaced with internal combustion engines at that rate. We look at different applications like hybrid and plug-in hybrid as ways to meaningfully reduce emissions, at a price point that most consumers can access. The average transaction price of a fully electric vehicle in Canada in 2019 was about $56,000. That's not accessible to the average Canadian. That doesn't mean stop selling electric cars. Of course, we should be promoting them, but we need to be realistic, about other ways of also reducing emissions. And our approach within Toyota is that we cannot force consumers to buy a particular technology. So we're going to try and compete in all of those spaces.
And well, to your last point there, our friend Jeff, Steve Jobs had this kind of saying about, don't give the consumer what they want, give them what they don't know that what they want, i.e. the iPhone was a product that had no keys, and folks in the business sector like myself who used BlackBerries were like, this isn't going to be functional or practical, and next thing you know, it revolutions and changes the world. So Akira did mention solid state batteries as well. So I'm sure the company is kicking the tires, pun intended, around different methods of electrification. But you still strongly feel that hydrogen fuel cell is kind of one of the main focus areas for Toyota going forward.
I would refute that a little bit, Colin, in that, like I said earlier, we're looking at battery electric, we're looking at hydrogen fuel cell, we're looking at, hybrid and also plug-in hybrid. And we think all of those technologies have their place at the moment. A hydrogen fuel cell is obviously limited by cost, entry into the marketplace, and then availability of filling. The battery electric vehicles have their own challenges too. Range is certainly increasing, but charging times, performance in winter, all of the companies are investing in new battery technology because they recognize that the current battery technology, has some challenges. For us, for hybrids and plug-in hybrids, especially with hybrids, we can offer a hybrid which can get 30 to 40% reduction in emissions at a almost equivalent price point. So if you're looking at, in our case, the RAV4 was, the highest selling non-pickup truck across North America for the last 2 years. You can get a RAV4 hybrid for, a minimal incremental increase in cost as compared to the gas version. So it's a lot more accessible, and we're seeing, consumers choose that option. You'd mentioned, the Steve Jobs comment. There's a lot of people, answering surveys right now indicating that the next vehicle is going to be, a battery electric vehicle. But we went through that with hybrids, when we first introduced them 20 years ago. People are going to make decisions with their wallets, not their emotions. And at some point, when they make that decision, cost is still going to be a factor.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. And Frantz, you're potentially a tech startup who is a global leader when it comes to solid state LiDAR, a technology which one OEM feels they don't require on vehicles, but I think the rest of us all agree you need LiDAR technology in order for us to move closer to autonomous level 4 and level 5. Yeah, again, Silicon Valley of the North, you've been in this realm for many decades. Tell us some of the challenges and tell us why we're probably leading California when it comes to technology here in Canada as well.
Well, I would probably be a little bit more focused in my intervention, because I do think that, the Valley has some areas where it would be difficult for us to catch. But, I would say when you look at, Canada, like you said earlier, we have everything necessary from the baseline to be successful. I think now what we need more of is really, what I would call our anchor companies, our anchor ecosystems that will be the next wave, or that will serve as the next wave of growth. If I may make a parallel to the telecom, we had then eventually we had research in motion, and that out of these spawn out so many, not just research, but also startups or related companies. I think traditionally in the automotive space, we've had the anchor companies such as Magna and Linmar are some examples, but generally speaking, in the EV space, we're still looking for that anchor company that the whole ecosystem could rally around. I think when it comes to sensor technologies, LeddarTech, we are positioning ourselves to be that anchor company that can rally an ecosystem around it, but also that can serve as an example that regardless of your sensor node, because we absolutely believe that LiDAR is going to come, but we also feel that LiDAR may come later than most people expect. So, but our solutions can access, the camera, the radar, the IMU, the ultrasonic, so we can fuse all of these sensing modalities into a system, and eventually the LiDAR space. So having these anchor companies is necessary, but also a local supply chain strategy that is capable of absorbing these newer technologies coming from these emerging startups. So in our case, we've had to find customers elsewhere, all over the world, to be able to develop ourselves. But I think as if I take the Israeli example, there are similar startups in Israel who are able to find their first anchor customers and investors locally. And we need to be able to do that more in Canada in order to be more successful. If you look at the last 20 years, Israel has gone from no auto tech, virtually no auto tech, to a significant auto tech ecosystem. And that stems from, the strategy or the vision around anchor companies and anchor buyers as well.
Thanks for that. And, talking about one of the advantages I always feel that the Valley has to offer is from VCs, venture capital and being able to raise funds. That seems to be something that they've been able to, address really well. And, the question is, for a tech startup, for a company to grow, they need investment, whether that be private or public, whether that be, provided by a government programming, or whether it be through a venture capital. And really it is the wind that's required for their sales. Are we well positioned when it comes to VC funding or government funding? Does Canada need to change or tweak the way funding is done, whether it be on software or hardware, or whether it be on componentry to do with the zero emission vehicles? I'll open that question to anyone who would like to go first.
Well, maybe I can start since I'm right in the thick of things, raising capital. I would say Canada, we're actually very good when it comes to startup money. In fact, it's very easy for a startup to find government grants. As Soeren was mentioning earlier, you could work with the CNRC, you could work with the different various provincial programs to get startup money, startup funds. The issue we face is that as we become more of a growth platform, you need growth capital. That's when the US or Europe or China or more recently Korea, they scoop up those successful startups or mid-sized companies because we lack the growth capital. So I would say the biggest advantage that the Valley has over Canada is access to significant growth capital. If I wanted to raise, $1 billion to develop LeddarTech, it would be unfounded. I mean, not even conceivable to raise that capital in Canada. So you go to the Valley, it's quite normal. And so the ecosystem is established. There's enough money there for growth capital. And I think that's the biggest hurdle that local companies have to grow and to become global champions. And so therefore, unfortunately, what you end up happening is that to get to that point of becoming a number one dominating company, your cap table becomes international very quickly. And so it's unfortunate, but you have many successful Canadian companies who are still headquartered, where bulk of development is here, but the cap table is largely dominated by international investors.
And we're fortunate to have a major startup, a major tier one, and a major OEM here. So Soeren, with your Tech Scout background, now focused on kind of EV development, but Magna's known for acquisitions. Magna has been growing and moving its ship in a particular direction over the last decade or so by going through acquisitions. How important is investments from maybe a tier one like yourselves for the technology sector?
Yeah, for Magna, it is important to absolutely important to utilize the technology sources outside of our company. Yes, we have a lot of innovation inside, But through our Open Innovation Initiative, we really understand that there's a lot of opportunity in working with startup companies and universities and so on. So now Magna, as an automotive tier one, is a global company, and we work with startup ecosystems globally. So in Canada for sure, and in the US and beyond. So that's where we look to identify the best opportunities, and these are the focus is on strategic investments. So not just venture capital investments. It is in trying to fit a technology into our product portfolio down the road, or manufacturing process down the road. So that's maybe a slightly different topic there, a perspective there.
And Scott, listen, we've been working closely with Toyota Canada and the AVEN, Autonomous Vehicle Innovation Network project. We're also, from a digital manufacturing standpoint, been working closely with some of your colleagues. And the one thing, the model that we really do like that Toyota provides is that proof of concept, where a local startup can kind of, test out and prove out their technology's worth by being brought into an existing project, or a new project is provided. Is that one of the kind of strategic ways that Toyota kind of further develops technology, you feel?
Yeah, I'll take a step back first and say that in order to be competitive in Canada, we don't compete with the Detroit 3 or Honda from a manufacturing point of view. We compete with other Toyota plants. Trying to secure future mandates. So when you talk about electric vehicles, we'll all be competing for those, and we need to put our best foot forward. How we do that in Canada, and touching on some of the earlier themes, is we have a tremendous innovation network, and we also have a very, very highly skilled workforce. We've got incredible engineers working for our company, and when you look at our local ecosystem, we've got a lot of I'll say technology companies local to us who have particular skill sets in autonomous logistics. So it would be like autonomous robots delivering parts. That's an incredibly efficient way to do something, as long as the cost is not too high. So we like to work with those local companies, and first of all, it gives us a strategic advantage over other operations because they don't have access to that. But once we apply that technology, and it could be autonomous parts delivery, it could also be advanced vision systems for inspection. That offers those companies a gateway into Toyota, because we're not a company that's going to jump all over, a technology and run it through our entire organization. We like to try things out, prove their capability. And once we do that, we spread them around. And in Canada, and specifically in Ontario, where we're operating, we have tremendous potential, for trying out new technologies, proving out the concept, and then migrating them through the rest of Toyota, which is obviously good for the ecosystem because it gives them, a gateway into a very large multinational company.
Thanks, Scott. So I'm getting some questions coming in from the audience. There was a few that we had kind of prepped, but I want to move to one question, which is around Project Arrow, the APMA's new initiative. I was going to wear my Project Arrow t-shirt, but the opportunity to wear a dress shirt, in the past few months, I couldn't, pass that one by. But, we're developing a concept zero-emission vehicle. People are shaking their head. Associations, trade associations globally at the G7 meeting last January were like, what do you mean you're building a concept vehicle? For us, it's a demonstration vehicle. It will demonstrate the best of Canada's capabilities when it comes to everything from technology as a semiconductor to software, or when it comes to battery technology and even lightweighting. So really the question before we start to move on to some of the audience questions is, how do we feel a project like Project Arrow can benefit your individual companies and organizations, and to help improve Canada's global standing when it comes to technology, and that's a complete umbrella term for technology. How do you think Project Arrow and our initiative can support your three companies / organizations?
I'll maybe jump in first, Colin. I'd say, from my experience working within Toyota in Canada and even within North America, we're not really good at putting our hand up and saying, "Hey, come and look at us." We do a lot of good things, and we're not very good at making those things visible. We're humble. So I think a project like Project Arrow to say, "Hey, come look at what we have on offer," I think it's a great opportunity. And the more global you can make that to leverage the strengths of Canadian suppliers and Canadian technology companies. Honestly, that only helps us as an organization, as Toyota operating in Canada, because, our purchasing organizations are often global or at least regional. And, the more advertising, and awareness of local capabilities, it only helps us.
And Scott, just to make sure everybody listening and watching is aware, when the APMA 7 years ago said, let's build a connected vehicle, it was Toyota Canada and their Lexus RX 350 that was provided as a platform. When the AVEN project was launched just over 2.5, 3 years ago, it was again Lexus that stepped forward, or Toyota Canada that stepped forward and provided 2 RX 350 Lexuses to us. So again, thank you. We know you may be sometimes quieter and humble, but have no fear, you have Flavio and Colin here to really shout. But opening up to Frantz and Soeren, having this vehicle to be able to demonstrate, and it's going to be demonstrated globally, North America in 2023, and then Asia and Europe in 2024. How do you think a vehicle like this can put Canada on the map?
Yeah. So I think it's a great initiative, and I would think it is a very good opportunity for startup companies to demonstrate their technologies, on the system level. So yes, we understand these technologies are all good, but to demonstrate it on a system level in its effect on the overall vehicle experience and efficiency and so on, that is very important and helps to make the case. So yes, we from Magna will certainly monitor the progress of this program, and we'll support it and try to get as much benefit as possible from it as well.
Fantastic. I'm going to jump in with this audience question. Frantz, you guys have already shown your interest by completing an RFP for Project Arrow, so thank you very much for that. But a great question from the audience. Can I ask, this individual says, how the panel feels about non-automotive partnerships, for example, Ford and Google, Alibaba and SAIC, and the money it can bring? Who do they see becoming a partner with, and the Canadian hot partners? Is it Lucid? Is it somebody else? So what are our thoughts of, traditional OEs, automotive, suddenly partnering now with technology giants and then some?
Well, maybe I can step in. Call it from a technology point of view, to me, it's only natural. The car is resembling more and more like a consumer product, even though it's an automotive, but that same consumer device feel, you want to have the same feel in your car. And so it's only natural that a Google or an Apple or Baidu or all these consumer giants get into the vehicle. So from my perspective, that's quite natural. What is interesting is that we keep talking a lot about Google, and we talk about even Amazon more recently, as well as Baidu. But QNX, which is a BlackBerry company, has been in the automotive industry, has had these relationships for decades, and one of the leaders in operating systems. I think for Canada, what this means is now that this model is proven that it can work. Can we now take another look at this and say, okay, is there somewhere where we can become suppliers around these ecosystems that are forming? So, for instance, can we take advantage of what is being done between Ford and Google, for example? I do also think that one of the things that we do lack, which I mentioned earlier, is that anchor EV project, and I will tie that back to the Arrow project, because in my mind, you need a reference, you need a platform to follow. And so it's sort of like, takes the theory to the practical and brings the entire ecosystem together. And if you tie that to the consumerization of the vehicle, then perhaps we can take it one step further and look at consumer services. There are a lot of consumer services, computer vision, lots of AI that's been developed in Canada that can actually tag along and be the next wave of growth for us in the vehicle.
Just kind of focusing on logistics and supply chain, there is multiple reports coming about how the health of Canada's, raw materials when it comes to EV development. There is an abundance of information, as you just mentioned, Frantz. I think it's 174 million vehicles globally are carrying QNX's kind of, cyber secure operating systems, which allow, let's face it, a lot of infotainment systems to function on many vehicles. Scott and I were discussing ECUs the other day. I threw out 175. Scott said, you better check your numbers. I did. It's actually, they're saying hybrid vehicles to electric vehicles are averaging between 80 to 100 ECUs. And so, I lift this device up, and when I present, I always say our cars today are having a lot more in common with this than a the mechanical device from the 80s and the 90s. That being said, that question from the audience and the trend towards a technology platform, how do you think Canada is going to be faring over the next few years to continue being a major supplier for the auto sector? And we just have a few minutes before we wrap up, so this is open to anybody.
Yeah, so just a quick comment there. Canada has been doing well, very well actually, as a supplier to the automotive industry, and we see this as to continue. It's actually there's great opportunity, particularly as we mentioned the startup companies that are active here, the tech sector here in Ontario. So these are good. How to say good propositions to continue that strong role for Canada.
Thanks, Soeren. Well, we've got to
comment, Dhillon, Colin. So I also think that it's an incredible window of opportunity for Canada, where it used to be the barriers were somewhat physical, manufacturing capacity, but it's also now these barriers are lower in terms of it's more of a talent war. And as you pointed out in the opening, we have access to talent. It's also infrastructure, because for EVs, you need to have infrastructure. So we can build electricity and charging stations. We have access to roads and utilities. Now we have to build that infrastructure, but we can build it. We're not limited in terms of the base technologies that's required. So I think there's an incredible window of opportunity where Canada can actually benefit from, the talent, because it's a brain business now. It's no longer just a physical assembly of the vehicles. It's really about embedding new technologies and new features, which require a lot of brain thrust.
And I would just say there's obviously, an incredible opportunity, but you also have to realize that opportunity. Meaning, a lot of people focus on the potential of developing a battery supply chain in Canada. I think everyone agrees with that, but a lot of these things are still in the ground. And we need to get them out of the ground and available at a cost that's globally competitive. And we're not there yet. Is the opportunity there? Absolutely, but we still have some work to do.
Yeah,
great. Thanks, Scott. Well, hey, listen, a big thank you to all three of you, Soeren, Frantz, Scott. Thank you for being panelists. A big thank you to Nimish and the team at Automotive Logistics and Supply Chain. Hopefully this was informative, ladies and gentlemen. We appreciate you being here, and thank you very much. Stay safe.
Thank you.
Thank you.